Hello YouTube, how are you? My name's Jude and welcome back to my channel. Today we will be breaking down a very special card, UFC Freedom 250, taking place on the White House lawn. Now I'm not the biggest fan of the concept or principle of this event, but we're going to keep my political opinions out of it and just appreciate the 7 fights that are on this card. With it being a seven fight card, little disappointing. I wish there would have been a few more fights, like maybe even 10, like the Sphere was. I just think 7 isn't a lot, but it's going to be the first time, to my knowledge, that the UFC has held an event outdoors, and all 7 of the fights should be pretty entertaining. But before that, we're gonna go over yesterday's card, I guess, and talk about how I did and the fights to make next for the winners of that card. And I went 8 for 12. I dropped again on Tapology. I don't really care about that, to be honest with you, though. Um, we'll bounce back at some point, I'm sure. But we went 8 for 12. Little upset that I got Bruno Silva versus Edgar Chairez wrong, because I was talking myself into picking Edgar Chairez, and then Edgar Chairez went out and had a great performance, probably the best performance of Edgar Chairez's career when you look at, well, he was fighting a ranked fighter, and he made pretty quick and easy work of Bruno Silva, dropped him twice, and then was able to submit Bruno Silva. So I'm very happy for Edgar Chairez. Like I said in my prediction video, I really, really like Edgar Chairez, and he's going to be ranked come Tuesday morning. So shout out Edgar Chairez, and Bryce Mitchell got it done. I convinced myself into picking Santiago Luna because I thought that Luna would be able to fend off the takedowns of Bryce Mitchell, and that just wasn't the case. So yeah, I was overrating Santiago Luna's wrestling, but Luna's very young in his career and has a lot of room to improve. I don't think Bryce Mitchell is necessarily a bad loss for Santiago Luna to take. I just wish I wouldn't have made that pick. And then same with the main event. I I did not think that Gabriel Bonfim had 5 rounds of cardio in him, but Bilal really didn't make it a huge point to try and shoot on Gabriel Bonfim, and the couple times he did, he got stuffed. Um, pretty weird, pretty weird fight IQ from Bilal, but I was also just overrating Bilal and should have known better on that one, I think. But that fight reminded me a lot of Moreno versus Kavanaugh. A lot of people thought that the way that Bonfim would get it done would be early, and then he wouldn't have the cardio to go 5 rounds. But like Loner Kavanaugh, Gabriel Bonfim showed to randomly develop 5 round cardio. So that was a great performance from Gabriel Bonfim. He looked really good, and I'm excited to see Bonfim versus JDM or whatever fight they make next. And then ZM versus Tom Nolan, just poor fight IQ from Fares ZM. I still think Fares ZM's probably the better fighter, but that was just a pretty bad performance from Fares ZM. I don't want to cope with it. Tom Nolan looked good. Um, I thought this fight would take place more on the feet, and it was just kind of grappling back and forth between them. So, good performance from Tom Nolan to get himself in the rankings, but questionable fight IQ and decision making from Fares ZM in that fight. We'll just talk about who I want to see these winners fight next. I'm not gonna talk about the girl fights because none of them were really in the rankings, and I'm not really tapped in enough with WMMA to make a next fight for them. But I got all 3 of the women's fights correct on this card, so I was happy about that. Um, yeah, but for Marcus McGee, I think we see him fight probably outside of the rankings again. Um, I don't really know who to put Marcus McGee against. I wouldn't hate if they just rebooked the Jakub Viklach fight, or if they gave him someone like Said Nurmagomedov, or like a Ricky Simone even for Marcus McGee. I think that's a pretty winnable matchup for McGee. And then for Alessandro Costa, uh, you could argue early stoppage in that fight, but the body language of Matt Schnell looked really bad. So for Alessandro Costa, I think he fights someone outside of the rankings again, and could maybe give Alessandro Costa like could be a good matchup for Costa. You could honestly give him like a Sumaderji, unless they want to rebook Muderji versus Perez. You give Alessandro Costa, mm, even like a Rey Saruya would be an interesting fight for Alessandro Costa since they both recently got first round finishes. They should be on a similar timetable of returning. Bryce Mitchell, I think you could honestly give someone at the bottom of their rankings. Not really sure who's ranked at bantamweight right now, the lower end of their rankings, but even him versus like a Raul Rosas, I think is a good fight that Bryce Mitchell would probably win. Um, yeah, I think something like a Raul Rosas would make sense for Bryce Mitchell, unless you want to give him someone right outside the rankings again. Um, for Iwo Baraniewski, Iwo could give someone at the bottom of the rankings, but not really. There's not really anyone that I think um, is warranted for Iwo to fight right now, so I don't really know who Iwo should fight next. But Edgar Chairez, I did have someone in mind. I think Edgar Chairez should be fighting like a Tim Elliott. Tim Elliott's ranked number 11 at flyweight right now. Edgar Chairez is going to be ranked number 15 probably. And I think that fight makes a lot of sense. And I do think Edgar Chairez wins. But yeah, Tim Elliott's not booked. And coming off a loss to Steve Erceg, I think that fight would make a lot of sense. I think Bonfim versus JDM is a decent next matchup. And then for Brendan Allen, since apparently Joe Pyfer was going to be fighting on the UFC 330 card against Kyle Borralho, I think you could just put Brendan Allen in there since Borralho is going to be hurt. Do Brendan Allen versus Joe Pyfer. Pretty weak performance from Brendan Allen, though, to be honest. Like, kept it pretty close with Edmund Shabazi, and I was not super impressed with that. And then for Joe Anderson Brito, I was very, very happy to get that one right. Shout out Joe Anderson Brito. He's one of my favorite featherweights. I think you give Brito like Josh Emmett, honestly. Josh Emmett sitting at number 15 in the rankings. You give Brito like a Patricio Pitbull, but something right outside of the rankings for Joe Anderson Brito, because I do think that he should have won the William Gomez fight and then the Pat Sabatini fight. Pat Sabatini's kind of been doing that to everybody, and I have matched up Pat Sabatini with Aaron Pico or someone towards the bottom of the featherweight rankings. So I think for Joe Anderson Brito to fight like a Josh Emmett or Patricio Pitbull is a logical next step. Now he's on a 2-fight win streak, beating Isaac Thompson and Jordan Levitt. And yeah, for Tom Nolan, I think you could do like a Tom Nolan versus... Tom Nolan called out Moicano. I don't think that's necessarily a unrealistic matchup for him, so you could do that for Tom Nolan. Or you could make Tom Nolan fight outside the rankings like they just did for SZM. But yeah, I don't think he's going to be fighting Quillen Salkild or anybody like that since they're boys. And Moicano would make a bit of sense. You could also give him like a Dan Hooker. But besides that, someone outside of the rankings for Tom Nolan. And then we'll just get into UFC Freedom 250. I don't know why it's... Like, I understand why it's called UFC Freedom 250, but they don't usually just name events like this. They could have just made it a numbered event, but that's besides the point. We'll get right into that. Only 7 fights to break down, so this should be a quicker video on my end, especially because I think some of these fights are relatively straightforward. There's only a couple that I've been going back and forth on, or even considering picking another guy. And one of those fights is Diego Lopez versus Steve Garcia, the fight to open up the card. I think this is smart from the UFC to put this fight opening up the card, even though I think it's honestly probably the third or fourth best fight on the card, depending on if you put it over Sean O'Malley versus Amin Zahabi. And I do think that this is a better fight than Sean O'Malley versus Amin Zahabi. So I think this fight is probably the third best or third highest profile fight on the card. And we have Diego Lopez, whose only 3 losses in the UFC are the 2 to Alexander Volkanovski and the loss to Movsar Evloev in his short notice debut. But besides that, he has been on a tear, you could say. Besides the Dan Ige fight, that one was a little sketchy, but that was on short notice, up a couple weight classes. That one was a little bit sketchy. Besides that, he knocked out Pat Sabatini in round 1. He knocked out Sadiq Youssef in round 1. He, like we said, the decision victory over Dan Ige here. almost knocked out Brian Ortega in that fight, but he dominated Brian Ortega at the Sphere, and then he was able to finish Gene Silva after a little bit of adversity in the second round coming back at him from Gene Silva, but he had a good first round against Gene Silva and then was able to find the finish when Silva got over aggressive. But like I said, his only two losses, Alexander Volkanovski and Movsar Evloev in the UFC. Then we have Steve Garcia, who, since moving to featherweight, is undefeated in the UFC. He's on a 7-fight win streak right now, and 6 of them are by knockout. You can notice Steve Garcia is in my channel banner. He's my favorite 145er. He trains out of Albuquerque. I do not agree with Steve Garcia's political ideology at all, but he's still one of my favorite fighters just for how he performs in the octagon. Steve Garcia has a couple sneaky good wins on his resume right now, but this is a huge step up in competition for him. The win over Melquiades Costa at lightweight is aging really well, and then since then he's been able to beat Sungwoo Choi and Kyle Nelson and Calvin Kattar, and then most recently got the first round finish over David Onama in a fight where he was relatively close in odds, and I couldn't understand that. I told all my friends to bet Steve Garcia by round 1 knockout over David Onama, and that's exactly what happened. But this is a very, very different matchup than any of these guys that Steve Garcia has fought recently. And yeah, I want to pick Steve Garcia here. I was trying to convince myself to pick Steve Garcia, and I do think that this will be a competitive fight. I just think Diego Lopez is more well-rounded, and I think they carry a similar amount of power on the feet. Steve Garcia, more aggressive, is able to throw maybe in combination a little bit better than Diego Lopez, and he's more wild. But Diego Lopez, a bit more of a technical, more controlled fighter, and he does have a much better ground game than Steve Garcia. I think this fight will be primarily on the feet, and yeah, I think this will be a very competitive fight for as long as it lasts. But Steve Garcia has shown some issues in the past with being a little bit of a glass cannon. He has tightened up the defense and is looking a lot better. Hasn't really gotten hurt recently in any of these fights and was able to school Calvin Kattar across 3 rounds. So we know that Steve Garcia won't necessarily slow down in this fight. We know his power will transfer because he was able to drop Calvin Kattar really late and almost finish him there. So I don't think the cardio will be an issue for either guy. We've seen Diego Lopez go 5 rounds twice now against Volkanovski in losing efforts, but he had a little bit of success against Volkanovski in each fight. The first fight was closer than the rematch, but I am going to slightly favor Diego Lopez here, removing my bias from it. But I am going to be completely transparent when I say that I'm rooting for Steve Garcia to win. I want Steve Garcia to win. I'm trying to remove my bias from it and not just pick the fighter who I want to win. Steve Garcia will have like a 2.5-inch reach advantage here. Even though he's only an inch taller, I think he's just a bigger featherweight than Diego Lopez, but Diego Lopez is also a pretty big featherweight. So I think they stack up pretty well against each other in terms of frame and size. But I am going to be picking Diego Lopez to win this one. I don't necessarily know if he's going to finish Steve Garcia, but I think that's going to be if this fight is primarily taking place on the feet, I do think that there's a very high chance that someone gets finished. So I'm going to be picking Diego Lopez to win this fight by round 2 TKO over Steve Garcia, even though I don't want to. Even though I want to pick Steve Garcia to win this fight by KO. Diego Lopez has been fighting at the top of the division for longer. He's been fighting the higher level competition, and the 2 fights with Volkanovski, the fight with Evloev, the fight with Gene Silva, are all going to help him in this fight. Even though he lost those fights against Evloev and Volkanovski, it's great experience for Lopez. Lopez is the younger fighter here. Momentum is a very real thing that Steve Garcia is going to carry into this fight, but I'm going to be picking Diego Lopez and rooting for Steve Garcia. So we'll get through that one and move on to Bo Nickel versus Kyle Daukaus. This is the lowest level fight on the card. I'm not sure why they're so insistent on putting Bo Nickel in these spotlight spots. and this matchup is one that they clearly want him to win. I think Kyle Dawkins does have the potential to give Bo Nickel a bit of trouble in this fight. I do think it's a bit of a tricky matchup for him, and one that Bo Nickel isn't going to be super eager to take to the ground, because Kyle Dawkins does have a really solid submission game, probably the better jiu-jitsu overall than Bo Nickel, but Bo Nickel's obviously the better wrestler. I think it's relatively even on the feet, though. Um, yeah, maybe a slight edge in power to Kyle Dawkins, but I don't think it's really going to be enough here. I think that Bo Nickel is going to be able to get this one done. I'm going to pick Bo Nickel by decision. When we look at some of their most recent fights, Kyle Dawkins was actually a guy that was cut from the UFC, and then he had 4 fights in CFFC where he looked good but not great. Like, he was getting hurt in those fights in CFCC or CFFC. Sorry. I'm not quite sure. I think it's CFFC, yeah. He took a bit of damage in these fights. He didn't look like untouchable in these regional fights by any means. But since he's been back in the UFC, I actually did pick him here to beat Michel Pereira as a pretty big underdog in, it was either Shanghai or Macau. I think it was Shanghai. I could be wrong though. But I actually did pick him here to beat Michel Pereira, and he got that done early and flattened Michel Pereira like a board. And then this fight with Gerald Meerschaert, he was able to hurt Meerschaert and lock up the Darce, which is relatively impressive to be able to submit Gerald Meerschaert, but that's actually where most of Meerschaert's losses have came in his career is by submission, even though Meerschaert's a grappler. And then Bo Nickel, the one loss in his career was that fight against Rainer de Ritter where he couldn't have his way with him and then kind of started to crumple and fold to the pressure on the feet, and eventually that body shot that knee to the body was able to put Bo Nickel away. Kyle Dawkins does have a lot more experience than Bo Nickel, and he has fought the better competition than Bo Nickel. Bo Nickel fought on UFC 300, was able to submit Cody Brundage, was able to beat Paul Craig in a fight where he was scared to engage in the grappling. Then, like we said, he lost to RDR, and then since then, he looked pretty good in this fight against Adolfo Vieira. He was winning the entirety of this fight, but again, he didn't really want to take Vieira down. And then he was able to get a nice head kick finish in round 3 over Vieira. But like we saw, Vieira is not great. He lost to Meconico. So I do think this will be a very competitive fight, and I do think it will be primarily on the feet, because I don't think Bo Nickel is really going to want to take Kyle Dawkins down all that much. I'm going to lean towards Bo Nickel by decision, but I don't hate if you're trying to put some money on Kyle Dawkins, or if you're just flat out picking Kyle Dawkins, because I do think that Bo Nickel remains overrated, and yeah, I think it'll get exposed again when they shoot him up the rankings inevitably. I do think he'll be able to get past Kyle Dawkins here, but if they give him another shot in the rankings, I think he loses to pretty much anybody in the middleweight rankings right now. Yeah, because Dolidze's moving up, and that's one of the few winnable matchups for him. But pretty much everybody else I would pick with high confidence to beat Bo Nickel. I think Bo Nickel is honestly near his ceiling right now, unless he keeps improving on the feet. But yeah, I'm going to lean towards Bo Nickel in this fight by decision. But either way in this fight, an American's going to win, so I guess that's good for something. And we're going to move on to Mauricio Rufy versus Michael Chandler. And wow, okay. Everyone is picking Mauricio Rufy to knock out Michael Chandler, and I'm not saying I disagree at all. Michael Chandler has 2 wins in the UFC. The first one was his debut against Dan Hooker, but there was definitely some circumstances around that fight. It happened during COVID and all that stuff, but it was an impressive debut win over Dan Hooker, but that was like 5 or 6 years ago at this point. Since then, his only win has been Tony Ferguson in a fight where he lost the first round to Tony Ferguson. He got dropped by Tony Ferguson and then was able to knock him out in round 2. But yeah, they keep pushing Michael Chandler up the rankings, and he loses every single time. He lost to Justin Gaethje. He lost to Charles the first time. He lost to Dustin Poirier. He lost to Charles again. And then most recently, this fight at, I think, UFC 314 against Paddy Pimblett. He looked really, really bad against Paddy Pimblett and didn't have much of anything to offer at all. Got schooled by Paddy Pimblett there, and we saw what Gaethje was able to do to Paddy Pimblett. I think in the prime of his career, Chandler would have had a more competitive fight against Paddy Pimblett, but Michael Chandler is literally 40 years old. Um, so I do think it's wraps for Michael Chandler, to be honest. He doesn't use his wrestling, even though he wrestled in college. He was a really good college wrestler, but he doesn't use it in the UFC, or even in Bellator, he wasn't using it a lot. He's just kind of fallen in love with his hands, and he does throw hard. He has a lot of power on the feet, but I don't think that's gonna really work here for him. I know you could make the argument that Mauricio Rufy kind of wilted and didn't look very good against Benoit Saint Denis, but this is not Benoit Saint Denis. Benoit Saint Denis is probably like, I don't know how old Benoit is, but I think he's probably like 7 or 8 years younger than Michael Chandler. And then, yeah, Mauricio Rufy, that's really been the one slip up in his career. He looked great in his debut against Jamie Malarkey, looked good against James Yontop, but James Yontop missed weight in this fight and was carrying a crazy chin. There were several shots in this fight that Rufy would have knocked out basically anyone else with, but Yontop was able to eat, and then knocked out Bobby Green with the spinning hook kick or spinning heel kick. And like I said, he lost to Benoit Saint Denis here, but then had a very impressive comeback performance, not comeback, but bounce back performance against Rafael Fiziev, where he was able to knock out Fiziev in round two. And yeah, I see this one going pretty similar to the Fiziev fight for him. Um, I really, Michael Chandler's path to victory here is to take down Mauricio Rufy, and I just don't really see him doing that, especially on a huge stage like this. I don't think he's going to be trying to take down or slam Mauricio Rufy or really anything like that. And yeah, I just think a year removed from the worst performance of his career, I have zero faith in Michael Chandler to get this done. I'd be very surprised if Chandler won. And yeah, I like Rufy here. Pretty self-explanatory. Big reach advantage, 3-inch height advantage. I'm going to be picking Rufy to get this one done by probably early knockout. Probably round one or round two. But I'm going to say round one, to be honest, because I think Michael Chandler is going to oblige him on the feet, and I don't think that's going to go well for him. We move on to the most recent addition to this card, which is Derek Lewis versus Josh Hokett. Another very, very straightforward fight, in my opinion. Again, Derek Lewis, over 40 years old. He's 42, and that doesn't matter as much at heavyweight as it would in a division like lightweight, but he's still very old, and really all of his wins recently have come against low-level competition. Like, De Lima was a decent win for him. That was almost 3 years ago. Got destroyed and just laid on for 5 rounds in this fight by Jilton Almeida. Got a good knockout here over Rodrigo Nascimento, but Nascimento never belonged in a main event slot. I'm not sure why they even put him there. Probably shouldn't have even been ranked, to be honest with you. Then after that, he was able to finish Taliesin Teixeira, but we've seen how bad Taliesin Teixeira is. I don't rate Taliesin Teixeira at all. And then most recently, he just kind of wilted and gave up and quit in this fight against Waldo Cortez Acosta. And Josh Hokett has relentless pressure, like we saw in his fight against Curtis Blades. I did count out Josh Hokett in that fight against Curtis Blades, and he proved me wrong. But yeah, he looked really good in this fight against Curtis Blades. I did think that he won, but before that, he's been looking really good. Performance on the Contender Series was a little bit questionable, but since joining the UFC, he's been doing great. And the Curtis Blades fight is what has solidified for me that Josh Hokett's going to get this one done. I'm going to pick Josh Hokett to win this fight by round one knockout. Derek Lewis's only chance in this fight, in my opinion, is to get his own first round knockout, and I don't think that that's going to happen. So I'm going to pick Josh Hokett with very high confidence in this fight. Probably my most confident pick on the whole card. But yeah, Hokett is another guy that trains out of Jackson Wink in Albuquerque. I do like Josh Hokett. I think he's a bit of a tool, but I do like him. I do think that he's a good fighter, and I think he gets this one done and probably says something crazy on the mic. I don't even know if they're going to want to give him the microphone after he gets the win, but if he gets a first round knockout, they're going to have to. Now we move on to the featured fight on this card. We have Sean O'Malley versus Eamon Zahabi, and going to be fully transparent in this one. I think of the 7 fight win streak that Amin Zahabi's on, he could have lost 3 of those fights, and it'd be looking like a very, very different career trajectory for Amin Zahabi. He wouldn't be ranked, and he'd probably be close to retiring, because I think you can argue that he lost this fight to Javid Basharat. Very close fight here where not a lot happened. I think you can easily make the argument that he lost that one. He beat Pedro Munoz, and then this fight against Jose Aldo, I thought he lost. I was very pissed because on this specific card, I got every single fight correct besides Amin Zahabi versus Jose Aldo, and I think that Aldo should have won. So that should have been a card that I swept, and that didn't end up happening because the Canadian judges and the referees um, allowed Zahabi to stay in this fight, and they gave him the win, even though I thought Aldo won round 1 and 2 pretty clearly. And then even in this fight against Chito Vera, I think you can make the argument that Marlon Vera won round 1 and 2. Definitely won round 1, and then round 2 was a toss-up that I would slightly favor to Marlon Vera. But yeah, like I said, out of his last 4 fights, I think he could have lost 3 of these. And the other hand, we have Sean O'Malley, whose only 2 legitimate losses have been to Merab. Like we saw in his rematch with Chito Vera that the first fight was a fluke, and he was able to put on a masterclass against Chito Vera. Amin Zahabi going to split decision with Chito Vera. Sean O'Malley 50-45s him, and has the best performance against Chito Vera that anybody's really ever had. So the win against Aljamain Sterling too, good knockout for him. Win over Chito Vera. The 2 losses to Merab are tough, but Merab would smoke Amin Zahabi. Amin Zahabi's not even a wrestler either, so that's not a big concern of mine, is that Amin Zahabi takes down Sean O'Malley. I don't think that will happen. And if he tries, I don't think it'll be super effective. And then most recently, we saw Sean O'Malley get a close decision win over Song Yadong, another guy who I think is levels above Amin Zahabi. So I think this is a pretty big step down in competition for Sean O'Malley, especially coming off the Song Yadong fight, and I think the UFC knows what they're doing here. I think the UFC is looking for a signature Sean O'Malley knockout here. Sorry, I always do that. Signature Sean O'Malley knockout here, and I kind of think that it'll happen. I wouldn't be surprised if this fight goes to a decision. A lot of people are picking this fight to go to decision, but yeah, Sean O'Malley is a bit more of a point fighter than anything, but I think he's hunting for a knockout. He said recently in an interview that he thinks he could maybe secure another title shot against Petr Yan if he gets a knockout here. So I do think that he's going to hunt for that, and I do think that he finds it late. I do think that Sean O'Malley will be able to get a knockout here, probably in round 3 after sort of breaking down Amin Zahabi like he did to Chito Vera. Even though Amin Zahabi's a slow starter, and I could see O'Malley getting this one done early, Sean O'Malley really hasn't put anyone away early. I think this will kind of be an accumulation of damage, and I think O'Malley will have to hurt him a couple times before he gets Zahabi out of there. So I'm going to pick Sean O'Malley to get a late finish. I might switch this one to decision, though. Zahabi's very durable, so I might switch this one to decision, but I can see, yeah, we're going to lean towards decision here for Sean O'Malley, actually. But either decision or late knockout for Sean O'Malley, in my opinion. All right, now we move on to Alex Pereira versus Cyril Gane in the co-main event for the UFC interim heavyweight title. And I think whoever wins this fight will probably get promoted to undisputed, because it's really looking doubtful that Tom Aspinall will ever return to the UFC. And honestly, I was on the Tom Aspinall side of things for a long time, but now it's been 7 months since his last fight, and I'm just kind of over it. I'm kind of over the whole Tom Aspinall situation. And yeah, I'm glad the UFC is sort of moving on from that, to be honest. Even though I think it's a little weird that they're giving it to Cyril Gane here. I think Volkov's more deserving. I think that Volkov probably won that fight over Gane, where it ended up being a split decision for Gane. Yeah. I'm really struggling with this one more than any of the other fights. Cyril Gane able to knock out Sergey Spivak, and then the close decision against Alexander Volkov. And then on the other side, Alex Pereira, this is his first fight at heavyweight. Had a pretty impressive run at light heavyweight, knocked out Jamal Hill, knocked out Yuri twice, and knocked out Roundtree after dropping the early rounds to him. He lost this fight to Magomed Ankalaev the first time around, and then smoked him in a round in the rematch. So pretty impressive way to settle the score there against Ankalaev, and now he's moving up to heavyweight. Um, Alex Pereira is actually the older fighter here by 2 years. There's a 2-inch reach disadvantage against Cyril Gane. And I'm not gonna sit up here and bullshit. Like I'm really struggling with this one, but I do in a weird way think that it's kind of KO or bust for Alex Pereira. And that's sort of been proven because the times that Alex Pereira has gone to decision has been against Jan Blachowicz in a fight that I thought he could have lost, and then the fight against Magomed Ankalaev, which he did lose. And Cyril Gane's going to be the hardest guy to hit that Alex Pereira has fought in quite a while. And I'm not sure if the power is really going to translate for Alex Pereira all the way up to heavyweight. This might age very poorly. I am kind of fence sitting this one, honestly. I don't have a strong opinion either way on who I think is going to win this fight. I think it'd be really cool to see Alex Pereira win this fight and become the first 3-division champion in the history of the UFC, and probably the only 3-division champion that the UFC will see. But I really don't know if he gets this done if it's not a knockout for Alex Pereira. Like I don't know. I don't think Cyril Gane's ever been knocked out. I actually don't know that he hasn't been knocked out because his 2 losses are to Francis Ngannou and the submission loss to John Jones where it looked like he took a dive. And besides that, if this one's going to stay on the feet, I don't think Gane's going to really take down Alex Pereira. I don't think that's a viable path to victory for him. But I do think that Gane will probably stay safe enough to not get knocked out in this one. This is going to be a very unpopular pick. I'm pretty sure almost everyone that's going to be watching this video is going to disagree with this pick. But I'm currently slightly leaning towards Cyril Gane to win this one by decision, and I hope you can understand my rationale, even though I don't have a very good rationale for it. There's obviously a very solid chance that Alex Pereira is able to track down Cyril Gane and knock him out. You could say, wow, really? Tai Tuivasa was able to hurt Cyril Gane? And you'd be right about that. So yeah, I just have a weird feeling about Gane winning this fight by decision. I think if this fight does go to the scorecards, I am pretty heavily going to favor Cyril Gane because Alex Pereira doesn't really win minutes. He just wins moments. And I do see Cyril Gane just kind of being able to dance around on the outside and sort of outpoint Alex Pereira in this one to a relatively close decision. So I'm leaning Cyril Gane, but I could end up switching this one. This is not a confident pick at all. This is actually my least confident pick on the entire card. And it's like a 51% lean to Cyril Gane here for me. Because I can see Pereira getting the knockout. I'm struggling to see Alex Pereira win a 5-round decision all the way up at heavyweight against Cyril Gane, who has great movement, who's very fast. And Alex Pereira's fast too. Alex Pereira has good movement too. I just think this is a really tricky matchup for him, and I don't see Gane getting KO'd here. And this could age horribly. Then everyone will be vindicated because Alex Pereira just knocks out Cyril Gane. But I'm not really confident that happens. So I'm going to lean Cyril Gane. I might end up switching it. But yeah, I just am slightly leaning Cyril Gane in that fight. Now we get to the main event, and this is a fight that I don't have to fence sit at all. I really could break this fight down in 30 seconds. Ilia Topuria is going to knock out Justin Gaethje in round 1, like he did to Charles, and well, a lot of his other knockouts are in round 2. Like he knocked out Volkanovski in round 2. Crazy win, by the way. This Max Holloway fight, I think, went into round 3, and then he knocked out Holloway. So this is either going to be round 1 or round 2 knockout for Topuria, depending on how aggressive Justin Gaethje is. And I kind of just think that Justin Gaethje is going to go out there and strike with him. I don't really need to explain my logic in this one, but Justin Gaethje got picked apart and outstruck and outclassed on the feet by Max Holloway across 5 rounds and got knocked out by Holloway at the end of that fight. And Ilia Topuria, while he did have a little bit of a tough time with Max Holloway, he didn't really, because he was able to track down Holloway and be the first person and only person to knock out Max Holloway. Um, yeah, this is not Paddy Pimblett. This is not Rafael Fiziev for Justin Gaethje. I think Topuria finds the knockout here as soon as Justin Gaethje starts to engage with him, and I think that's going to come in round 1. I don't really need to spend that much more time on this one. Topuria is the much younger fighter. He has the much cleaner boxing, and I think he's the much more technical fighter overall. I don't really see the arguments for Justin Gaethje here, other than you're trying to pick an underdog like how Sean Strickland beat Khamzat Chimaev. I really just kind of think it's a flyer if you're picking Justin Gaethje here, and I don't see it. I don't see it at all. I'm picking Ilia Topuria by round 1 knockout in this fight. So we're just going to briefly recap the picks that I have for UFC Freedom 250. I'm going to be picking Diego Lopez by round 2 knockout over Steve Garcia. Even though it pains me to do so, I want Steve Garcia to win, like I said. I'm going to pick Bo Nickel by a competitive decision over Kyle Dawkins. I'm going to pick Mauricio Rufy to get it done in round 1. I'm going to pick Josh Hokett to get it done in round 1. O'Malley by either decision or late finish. I am tentatively picking Cyril Gane to win this fight by decision, and then I'll be picking Ilia Topuria to get an early knockout and vicious knockout against Justin Gaethje. But that'll do it for me today. You can let me know what you guys think. I appreciate the comments and the support. My video last week was my least viewed video that I've had, but the week before that I had the most viewed video that I've had. So I'm not going to read too much into either of those things. I'm just going to keep posting my videos. And I am going to make the promise that I will make a recap video for UFC Freedom 250, because I feel like it's too big of a card to not recap. So I will be flying when a lot of this fight card takes place, so I'm going to have to buy in-flight Wi-Fi so I can watch this live, but I will try my absolute hardest to make a recap video after this event is over. I won't get back into town until like midnight, so this will be uploaded pretty late on, I guess, Monday morning, or late Sunday night, very early Monday morning, probably around 1 or 2 a.m. on Monday. But yeah, like I said, I appreciate everyone who's watching my videos, and yeah, I'm not going to give up just because my Tapology ranking has dropped a little bit, because the only real reason that it's dropping so much has been that I've been struggling with my method of victories. So hopefully we can tighten that up a little bit. Hopefully we can get some momentum going again. But that's it for me today. I'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.